Houston, we have a problem.
Welcome to Now Playing Podcast's review of Apollo 13.
It'll be a hell of a mission, one for the books.
Hosted by Brock.
You, sir, are a steely-eyed missile man.
Justin.
You can't live without me.
And Arnie.
I'm gonna give these guys a beautiful ride.
But be warned, this episode will contain detailed plot spoilers and mildly objectionable language.
Failure is not an option.
We hope you enjoy the show.
This could be the worst disaster NASA's ever experienced.
With all due respect, sir, I believe this is going to be our finest hour.
Today we're talking about Apollo 13, starring Tom Hanks, Kevin Bacon, Bill Paxton, Gary Sinise, Ed Harris, Kathleen Quinlan, directed by Ron Howard. This is Brock, co-host of Now Playing.
Good evening, America, and welcome aboard our podcast for Apollo 13. This is Arnie.
This is Justin. It's good to see you guys again.
Likewise. So, Arnie, why are we doing Apollo 13 today?
Well, in case you haven't followed us on social media and didn't hear our review of Sinners last week, Houston, we have a problem. Our friend Stuart is still in the hospital, still in the ICU, and we do not want to do any of the shows he was planned to be on without him. So we are holding off on reviewing Thunderbolts. Today was supposed to be our review of the latest Marvel Cinematic Universe film. We're holding off on that review until he is able to join us. And so what do we put in its place? Well, for a long time, Stuart and I have talked about doing an extra show just to keep in the archives in case one of us got sick or some emergency happened and we weren't able to put out a show. And we could never agree upon what movie we should cover, so we never actually got that show done. But what Stuart was adamant on is it should be a disaster movie to reference a disaster occurring that Now Playing didn't record what we planned on recording that week. And so with him down, I kind of wanted to honor that wish. I was thinking, what is a good disaster movie to cover? And one thing I really wanted to do with Now Playing this year specifically was kind of celebrate 1995 and some one-offs from that. And I'd even pitched to Stuart the idea of doing a 1995 movie donation series looking at the one-offs from 1995. There were a lot of big films in 1995. Apollo 13, Braveheart, just a lot of movies that didn't get sequels or that I didn't see us covering the sequels of. So I was looking at 1995 for a disaster film, and Apollo 13. It was the third most successful film of 95. It's a classic, I think, that people have come to love over the years. It's kind of up there with Shawshank Redemption in that it's been on TV so many times that it feels like people watch this movie so often. I know during COVID, Ron Howard did an Apollo 13 watch along at that time. And so it seemed to check off all the boxes as a possible replacement we could do to honor our friend Stuart and put out a show we hope our listeners will be interested in.
I have to tell you that Apollo 13, the summer of 1995, I always think of this movie. I think of Batman Forever. I think of Babe. I think of Braveheart. There was actually a Rob Roy movie that year. Like 1995 is like a year of like incredible movies of going to the movies for me. And Toy Story later that year. This is one of the movies that when I saw it in 1995 in a packed theater in Manhattan, I don't think there was one female in the room. I think it was all guys going out to see a movie about astronauts, and you could hear a pin drop in that theater. Like, it was amazing. Like, it was one of the wonderful communal experiences that I had in Manhattan seeing a blockbuster movie. And since then, I've seen it numerous times, owned it on VHS, owned it on DVD, have it now on a streaming. We did show it to our children a couple of years ago, and when I told them I was watching again for this podcast, they said, "Oh, Apollo boring?" Yeah, they didn't like it at all. They hated it. They're teenagers. It's an old movie. They don't like anything that has like exposition and setting things up, with the exception, of course, of Back to the Future and Meet the Parents. They both appreciated the setups there, but here they did not want to watch it with me, and my wife was like, "You're nuts. It's a great movie."
When I think of 95, I'm immediately reminded that's the year that I became a young father. My son Tyler was born in 95, so wasn't hitting the theater a whole heck of a lot that year. But I did manage to see Toy Story at some point, and I think I did take a newborn to that, so I was that guy, apparently. But we didn't get to see Apollo 13 on the big screen back then, but I know we definitely saw it when it hit HBO and all that stuff back in the day. So I have seen this, haven't revisited a ton. I'm excited that we're digging into this one because I feel like it's a good compendium to The Right Stuff that we did years ago. It feels like a sequel to that movie in some ways.
Yeah, you got Ed Harris in both. I mean, he was put in Apollo 13 partially as a nod to The Right Stuff. When looking at Apollo 13, I didn't see it in theaters in 95, and I didn't see it on video. It just didn't appeal to me for some reason. And I think a lot of it is because I kind of knew the story of Apollo 13. There were a lot of documentaries and news reports about Apollo 13 when this movie came out. It was looking at the 25th anniversary of that mission. And I'm like, yeah, they all live. I don't really need to see this. And I like Tom Hanks. I was still seeing almost everything Tom Hanks does, but this one just didn't appeal to me. It's one of my wife's favorite movies, and she'd watch it over the course of our marriage. We got married in 2002, got together in 2000, and she'd watch it while I'm recording or while I was editing shows or watching other movies for Now Playing. I didn't see this until New Year's 2019 going into 2020 is when she finally sat me down and said, I love this movie. You need to watch this movie. And so I saw it for the first time less than 6 years ago. And this is my second time seeing the film.
Oh my God, really? That's amazing. That's unfathomable to me that you hadn't seen it until like 5 years ago. Wow.
Yeah, it was just one of those things that didn't grab me. I like the cast. I'm a fan of Bill Paxton. I really like Kevin Bacon. I like Tom Hanks.
Sure.
I'm iffy on Ron Howard. I think most of what he makes is milquetoast and adequate, with the exception being Parenthood, which is not a very stylistic film, but a well-juggled ensemble piece with a lot of characters handled very well and very emotionally and funny. But by and large, Ron Howard, I think, makes generic films. And so I'll never avoid a film because Ron Howard's involved. I'll never see a film because Ron Howard's involved.
You know, Ron Howard was at the height of his powers when he did this movie. Like, he had off a string of hits, and Far and Away was a little bit of a ding. Willow didn't really land, but you mentioned Splash, of course, was a few years before that. But then, of course, he had Parenthood, as you mentioned. He did The Paper with Michael Keaton a year before this, and then after this, he would win his Oscar. The big one, of course, is Backdraft.
See, and I thought that he was kind of on a string of misses. Willow was okay-ish. We reviewed that. Parenthood I loved, which we've reviewed.
Mm-hmm.
Backdraft, it did okay, but I didn't think anybody really loved that film.
Oh.
Far and Away was a real misfire that I don't think was liked critically, didn't hit commercially. I mean, it had Tom Cruise in it, so it still made $100 million, but I didn't think people liked it. And The Paper, which I really liked, I thought nobody saw. I thought it was really a small movie.
Right, so Backdraft is a gigantic favorite of a lot of people. It might be because of TBS. As you mentioned, this movie was run to death. People love Backdraft. I hadn't seen it myself until I realized I've seen all of Ron Howard's movies, but like 3, so I went back and watched those 3 fairly recently. But I remember when Solo, a Star Wars story, came out, and people were talking about, oh, they got Ron Howard, though. This is going to be great. You know, he's going to fix the movie. And I said to, like, practically everybody, okay, name the last movie that Ron Howard made that really made an impression. And people said, oh, Beautiful Mind, and Apollo 13, and Frost Nixon, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, all those movies were 20 years ago. Like, he has disappeared. After the 3rd Robert Langdon movie, I can't remember what he was doing. And so, for me, looking back at his career, this to me and A Beautiful Mind are the pinnacle, and why I wanted to watch the movies I had missed.
And what's funny is, you say, what has he been doing? I mean, the 3rd Robert Langdon movie was 2016, Solo was 2018. He's putting out stuff, and he's putting out stuff that I see and I don't even know is him per se, like Rush, if you remember that movie.
Saw it, yeah.
That's a Ron Howard film. And, you know, he did How the Grinch Stole Christmas, which was a big hit, and I think Gen Xers have come to love the Jim Carrey version of.
It's lousy. It's a lousy movie, yes. And Hillbilly Elegy, which was looking for Oscars for both Amy Adams and Glenn Close. That was a hard watch. Yeah, he's been working. But I really mean is what movies have really hit hard that were like, oh, Ron Howard is back.
For me, with Ron Howard, by the time I realized that he was being a big-time director and people were talking about him again, I would probably say I was kind of in my alternative or punk stage where it's just like, oh, if it's big Hollywood, whatever, it's kind of dorky. Oh, he used to be Opie and he used to be Richie Cunningham. So I probably kind of ignored his stuff in that way, but I have come to appreciate him, and it's mostly because of Arrested Development. He's in that show as the narrator, and there's so many jokes about his career and life on that. But in one of the later seasons, they go to meet him as he plays himself finally. He was never on screen, but they go to his office, and he has the lunar module in his office from this movie as a prop. And so they hang out in there, they have a meeting in there. It's just kind of a funny bit. But yeah, with Ron Howard, I'm kind of on the same page as Arnie, where it's like, he's not going to get me into the theater, but he's also not going to deter me from going to a movie.
Yeah, he seems like a nice guy. Everything I ever see about him, every interview, every red carpet, the guy just seems genuine, you know? And he even is doing conventions now. I saw, no kidding, he did a meet and greet with Potsy and Ralph Mouth at a convention in Orlando just a couple months ago. So I imagine that would be a fun meet and greet. But I loved Richie Cunningham as a kid. I loved Splash when I was a kid. But yeah, he's an okay director.
Yeah, I mean, one day we'll probably cover A Beautiful Mind. I think that's his masterpiece. He really got me on that one. I'm agreeing with you guys. This movie and Contact, which came out 2 years later, had me read A Man on the Moon, which was a wonderful book about the Apollo space missions. So in subsequent viewings of this movie, a lot of the information from that book was in here, like the beginning of the movie about the other astronauts. So it's really kind of neat that this movie spawned my interest in the space program. And another person who was spawned by these books was the lead of this movie, Tom Hanks, who loves the Apollo space mission history.
Yeah, he was actually telling his agent, I want to do a movie about the Apollo 13. And he'd been wanting to do that for a little while. And it turned out Ron Howard was making one. And his agent called Tom Hanks and was like, you've been looking for an Apollo 13 project. There's one happening. And so Tom Hanks got on the phone with Ron Howard. I think Hanks had won the Oscar for Philadelphia by the time they were having these conversations, but had not won for Forrest Gump yet. His 2 in a row Best Actor Oscar wins that would come the 2 years before Apollo 13 came out. Tom Hanks was kind of on top of the world at that point. And Ron Howard got interested in this because he'd read the book this movie is based on called Lost Moon, which was written by Jim Lovell, the astronaut that Tom Hanks plays in this film, and author Jeffrey Kluger. And for this review, I decided, all right, I should read Lost Moon and see what this is based off of, and I could not find that book. I found used copies going for like $50 on Amazon, in print only. Didn't have time to have Amazon mail me a book. This was kind of a fast turnaround show. It turned out they renamed the book Apollo 13 after this movie, and I was looking for a book called Lost Moon, and I was only finding the old printings of it, not the second edition, which was readily available for Kindle. So I did read that book, and this movie is very true to the tale of that book. The point of view being all about Jim and his family. We can talk about it as we go through, but it's amazing to me how much of what I think was cinema hokery put in by Ron Howard actually happened and was documented in this book before there was a movie.
Yes, I had heard a lot about that in the years subsequent, like the shower scene that we'll talk about later. That's true, and it seems like complete fabrication, but it's true. It's remarkable how much that is actually true about this that's put in the movie, and a testament to the actual story itself, that it didn't really need all that much manipulation to tell a good Hollywood story.
Yeah, I mean, they did some character merging. Anytime you do a biography film, whether it's a biopic about a person or in this case, more about an event, you've got to merge characters, adjust timelines, that kind of thing. But it seems really kind of minimal here.
I consumed a few documentaries on this after watching the movie for the same reason, kind of trying to dig in and see how much of this was dramatization, how much of this was for the movies, and strikingly, very little of this is played for cinematic drama. It seems to be very much based on real events as they occurred.
Arnie, in projects like this, very high-profile projects, a lot of people would like to be part of a movie about this with Tom Hanks. And forgive me for saying so, but the first people I think of to be in a capsule with Tom Hanks playing astronauts are not Bill Paxton and Kevin Bacon. They're great actors, but it seems like a weird combination of people. Now, Gary Sinise, I know, had just worked with Tom Hanks, got an Oscar nomination for Lieutenant Dan. I would bet everything I have, all the money I have in my pockets right now, that Tom Hanks recommended him. That's my guess on how he got involved, but how'd they end up with Bill Paxton and Kevin Bacon?
It could have been worse. You know who was trying to get in this film, and it is said that Ron Howard politely turned him down?
Scott Baio.
John Travolta. You're kind of on the right track.
Oh, wow. I was joking, but... Oh, wow. I wasn't that far off.
No, I mean, Chachi is kind of a wannabe Travolta. So, yeah, John Travolta wanted to be in this project. He really wanted to star in this project as Jim Lovell and was turned down. But because this was an ensemble film, it was kind of hard to find stars who wanted to take part. The first person offered Bill Paxton's role was John Cusack.
Oh.
And you'd think Cusack would probably take it.
Yeah.
I mean, he would be doing Con Air around this time. It's not like he was above a paycheck.
He'd be perfect. He'd be so good in this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, he turned it down, and then Brad Pitt was offered Kevin Bacon's role, but Brad Pitt didn't necessarily want to do an ensemble piece, and this conflicted with filming Seven, and let's all agree he made the right choice by filming Seven, and so he didn't do that. Gary Sinise pretty much said, you can audition for any role in this movie you want. You pick which role you want, and he decided to go for the character who was left on the ground, but he could have been in Bill Paxton's place. He could have been in Kevin Bacon's place. He tried out for the role that, Ron Howard immediately said, sure, you are fine for.
Wait a minute. I mean, Gary Sinise is a really great actor. He's been a theater actor for years. Why he chose to do CSI is his own business. I don't know why he would do that. However, of all four characters, that is the most complex of all of them, I think, to have the moon taken away from you for a technicality, not when you're up in a capsule. What he does with his eyes and his body language is remarkable. I think he is perfect for Ken Mattingly in this, and I think he made the right choice from an actor's point of view.
But they did get this cast, and Kevin Bacon had always kind of been a good character actor. I don't know that in the 90s his lead roles were all that memorable, but he was always good as part of an ensemble. If you think about A Few Good Men,
early on, Diner and Animal House. Kevin Bacon is one of those character actors who's too good looking to be a character actor, but he always does find himself in those kinds of roles, and he's so dependable. It's unbelievable. That's why there's so many roles that he's played with so many people, and why 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon was such a big thing at this time. Well, I think we all know the plot, but Arnie, just for the sake of consistency, why don't you tell us the plot of Apollo 13?
In April 1970, the U.S. launched their second trip to land on the moon with the launch of the Apollo 13. The 3-man crew planned for this trip was led by Commander Jim Lovell, played by Tom Hanks. This was Lovell's fourth and planned final trip to space, and Lovell had orbited the moon, but he dreamed of landing on it. His crew is Lunar Module Pilot Fred Hayes, played by Bill Paxton, and Command Module Pilot Ken Mattingly, played by Gary Sinise. But an exposure to the measles kept Mattingly on the ground, and he was replaced by his backup, Jack Swigert, played by Kevin Bacon. Lovell's wife, Marilyn, played by an Oscar-nominated Kathleen Quinlan, has a bad feeling about her husband's fourth trip to space, but she does go to the launch. Upon takeoff, the Apollo 13 hits its first snag when one of the second stage engines goes offline, but the other engines are able to compensate for it. 3 days into the mission, however, an electrical short causes one oxygen tank to explode and the other to leak. Ground control, led by Flight Director Gene Kranz, played by Ed Harris, suggests shutting down 2 of the Apollo 13's 3 fuel cells. But when that doesn't stop the leak, the mission changes from landing on the moon to just getting the crew home safely. To work on a landing protocol, the ground crew calls in Mattingly, who runs simulation after simulation to try and determine how to land the craft on the limited power it has left. To conserve power, the Apollo 13 is shut down, and the 3 men take refuge in the lunar module, or as they call it, the LEM, which is named the Aquarius. The crew deal with freezing cold and limited water rations, and their lack of sleep causes fever and illness, with Hayes even getting sick from a urinary tract infection. Also, tension runs high among the three men, as Hayes seems to blame Swigert for the accident, as Swigert was the one stirring the oxygen tanks when they blew. The three start to suffocate as too much carbon dioxide builds up and the filters start to run out, but the ground crew talks the astronauts through rigging up a backup filter. Mattingly is still working on a way to land the ship and finally improvises the idea of taking power from the landing module to give the little bit of extra power needed for the Apollo 13. With this plan in place, the world holds its breath as the three men disengage from the landing module and pilot the Apollo 13 through Earth's atmosphere. They land safely and are hailed as heroes. And in closing narration, we find out that Hayes never went back to space. His planned Apollo 18 mission was canceled due to budget cuts. Swigert was elected to Congress, but died of cancer before being seated. Mattingly did go to space on several missions. Krantz continued to work at Mission Control for many more years, as did Lovell, who stayed grounded for the rest of his career. And Lovell wonders when man will finally return to the moon, as credits roll.
So with movies like this, I feel like a lot of times where we know that it's based on real life events and there's documentaries and there's footage of it, I feel like movies a lot of times like to take their sweet ass time getting to that stuff, right? But this movie, we spent a whole lot of time on the mission, but up front we do have a little bit of storytelling to do and character setup to do. And so we start back in 1967 with Jim and his family watching the lunar landing with Neil Armstrong and kind of setting this tone of how important this whole thing is. Because for guys like us, we were born into an age where we had already been to the moon and we grew up with the space shuttle. So I kind of need this context to put me in the right mindset of how big of a deal getting to the moon was.
I agree, but however, you jumped over that they actually started the movie with how challenging space travel is and highlighting how on an earlier Apollo mission, 3 astronauts died while doing a training mission inside the capsule because the door was not able to be opened from the inside or whatever reason it was. And that's how the movie starts. So a harbinger of doom of how scary or how imprecise and how new the technology is about space travel. And then the wonder of space travel at Lovell's house with all the astronauts.
Yeah, this is really going to Lovell's book, which starts off talking in detail about the Apollo 1 disaster, which was just training. It wasn't even at takeoff, and how the 3 men died in a fire at that, and how he discovered that news. And then he talks in his book about all of the problems that were going on, and that he sort of implies that because it was the space race, NASA was kind of cowboying it, and maybe taking some unnecessary risks and getting a lot of ego about themselves, about being able to build things like one thing he discusses in the book is a lander that can't support its own weight here on Earth, but they say will be perfectly fine on the gravity of the moon, you know, that kind of thing. Just all of their math and all of their big brains, and questioning whether safety was the utmost priority or if getting to the moon before the Russians was the utmost priority. It's not scathing by any means. It's not an expose, but it raises those questions. And there was quite a bit about Apollo 1, which I'd never heard of before. So it was really eye-opening. So when I'm watching this movie and have that book in my mind, I'm like, oh, so they're following that book by touching on Apollo 1. There's going to be a conversation later on that Jim Lovell's going to have with his son about the Apollo 1. But yeah, they're going to start. It's a cinematic thing. A good way to get all of our characters into one place is a party. And even though these people weren't together when Apollo 8 landed on the moon, it's a good cinematic way to bring together everybody we're really going to be dealing with this whole movie.
Yeah, and setting up who they are and their personalities, ages, and things like that. And I have to say, because we are now playing some of the worst ADR I've seen in a Hollywood movie in my life. Some of this was just terrible. However, I did enjoy the scene very much, and I thought it did everything it needed to do. But Arnie, you mentioned earlier about Ron Howard, milquetoast, things like that. This is a Ron Howard scene. This does not play like the beginning of The Godfather at the wedding with introducing all the characters. It's the same idea, but done in a way different way.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I do love how we're introduced to Kevin Bacon. We're weirdly introduced to Kevin Bacon before anybody else. And they're going to draw attention later on. Dick Cavett is going to talk about how Kevin Bacon is a bachelor. He'll be the first bachelor astronaut. And here he is talking about a probe, and he's hitting on this woman with a beer bottle and a glass. And he's like, so if I'm the probe and you're this and I slide in.
Yeah, I mean, as much of a playboy bachelor, I think, that the late 60s, early 70s mainstream TV could muster, they were definitely painting his character in that way. The only confirmed bachelor to ever go to space, I believe, or was supposed to be the only one on the moon.
And we get a little bit here with Fred Hayes, Bill Paxton, and Ken Mattingly, Gary Sinise. But overall in this film, I find those three characters frustratingly underdeveloped. I understand this was based on Jim Lovell's book. Jim Lovell is the main character in Jim Lovell's book. He is the commander of this mission, but I kind of wish, especially here at the beginning, we got maybe a little bit more time with Fred's wife, Mary, because we're going to spend a lot of time with Jim's wife, Marilyn, and find out more about Mattingly. I think we see his wife during one scene.
That bothers you because why?
I would like to know more about the men who I'm going to be rooting for their lives to be saved. You know, I want to empathize with these people and really want to see them survive for their stories, their families, their lives, instead of just men are in danger. We don't want men to die.
Okay, now I get that. So we do spend a lot of time with Marilyn Lovell, and I think that sort of tension at home is completely funneled through her character. For me, this movie is about the triumph of man. So if it's too much of a character piece about the three men in the space capsule, I don't need that for this particular movie. For me, it's all of these men on a mission to get these three guys home is much more compelling than any sort of further character development. I think they gave the appropriate enough character development for all four of these guys for me to get the gist. So when they go into space, that's when the movie really happens.
Yeah, I can agree with that because I've already brought it up and I think it's going to keep coming up. I go back to The Right Stuff, and while I enjoyed that movie and I think it's an important watch, I do feel like we spend way too much time on the ground and learning about these characters, and that's more of the point of that movie. But I feel like Howard had to have that in his mind here, that he doesn't want to make a remake of The Right Stuff and let's get more to what we're here for rather than getting too much into the weeds with these characters. I'm with you, Brock. I think we know just enough about each of these people, what their family situation looks like, and why it's important to get them home.
I agree that it's sufficient. I just wish I cared more about the whole crew. I feel like, God help me, Michael Bay creates more in-depth characters in Armageddon with Steve Buscemi and Ben Affleck and Bruce Willis than we get out of Bill Paxton and Kevin Bacon here.
Wow, that's quite a comparison. But sure, I see your point. I just don't need that in this movie. And to put a fine pin on this, I don't need that in Armageddon either.
I get you. And the thing is, in this movie, I feel like even though Ron Howard calls it an ensemble film, I feel this is a Tom Hanks movie. And the only character we're going to get to know is Jim, and to a lesser degree, Jim's wife, Marilyn. And the other two are kind of cogs in the machine. You know, they're going to be functional characters, but you ask why Bill Paxton and why Kevin Bacon, and I say, yeah, why do we have actors of this caliber? We don't need even names in these roles. You could have anybody in these roles.
And which is why Sinise, as I mentioned earlier, picked Mattingly, because that has the most meat on the bones.
And then we're going to see that this is the crew of the Apollo 14, and Jim is encountering a senator. One of the things that Lovell does talk about is budgets and how the astronauts had to grease the hands of politicians to keep the budgets going for the space program. And here we're going to just get a glimpse of that as Jim is talking to a senator played by Roger Corman, if you didn't notice.
Oh.
I did not notice that. I did not know that.
Yeah, I didn't catch it till Ron Howard called it out on the commentary. Ron Howard's very first film, Grand Theft Auto, which I've never seen, was a Roger Corman production.
Yeah, he gave him a shot as a kid, and I've seen that movie, and it's very watchable. You should check it out.
Well, and Corman made a movie very similar to this not too long before this with his Fantastic Four, which is almost as good as this movie. A lot of same themes.
Reaching for the stars and mishaps in space, I agree. And bad ADR, so similarities abound. But actually, I don't think that movie had any ADR, which is why Dr. Doom sounds so muffled. Apparently, it's a tradition for Roger Corman alumni to give Roger Corman cameos in future films, and Howard hadn't done that up to this point, and he thought the role of a penny-pinching senator was absolutely perfect for penny-pinching Roger Corman. And it's during the same scene, though, you're going to completely forget the penny-pinching senator, because this is really where Lovell is told you're going to be on the 13 instead of the 14 because the original commander has an ear infection flaring up again.
So they get bumped up to flight readiness, and they have to, cram it in because they only have 3 months, and we see a whole bunch of scenes about simulations and how Jim Lovell wants to do it again all the time, and he wants to make sure they get everything right, and Ken Mattingly is a stickler for even millimeters of this or that. A bit of a training. It wasn't even like a montage, but it was very quick through to give us what you just asked about, Arnie, about who are these characters, why are they going into space, how good are they at their jobs, and how are they trained to go up there, and they throw these kinds of scenarios at them. Again, narratively speaking, this is very sound for a movie, setting up all of the things we need to know for later in the movie. They do a lot of this up front. I'm with Justin. I'm chomping at the bit. Get him into space. But all of the stuff does pay off enough that when you watch it on subsequent viewings, like I have, I find it terribly interesting how they wove this story together to give the audience the information they need to really amp up the tension when they get to space.
Yeah, I do think it's good character building, and I do think it does help weave the narrative of what NASA was doing at the time to show us that Jim wasn't originally set for this mission, and the behind-the-scenes maneuvering to get in there, and kind of shows you even astronauts that we on the outside kind of look at as heroes and bigger than life and stuff like that. There's some politicking going on behind the scenes, right? They want to be the guy on the next mission. They want to be the big name on the front page of the newspaper. But they also have decorum, and it's not like they're backstabbing, but there is that type of thing going on in this era.
Yeah, it's a lot more fair competition versus, as you say, backstabbing, but there is a lot of competitiveness. And we had Lovell talking to his wife about how he really wanted to be on the moon because he orbited the moon. He was able to name an area of the moon, a mountain on the moon, after his wife. And his dream is to get to that moon. That is his one goal. And so now he's got his chance. It's his big break to lead this crew. But we're going to get a little bit of drama going on, primarily through his wife, Marilyn, who's having nightmares, who just has a bad feeling about this. It's his 4th trip to space. She doesn't want to go to the launch. She's trying to come up with excuses like the kids are so busy and I've already seen 3 launches.
Yeah, we get to experience some of the traumatic experience that being close to an astronaut can have on somebody in a family through Marilyn, right? Like you said, she's having nightmares. There's even omens shown on screen. They're driving down the street in a nice brand new red Corvette at one point and it stalls out. That's foreboding. There's all these things being set up. But once again, I kind of have to bring up that I think this is important context, especially for somebody my age where, like I said, grew up with the space shuttle. It goes up, it comes down, no problem until the Challenger disaster. Didn't think too much about the danger of it. And I think at this time, it's good to give us that perspective of a wife who is proud of her husband and is behind him on his missions, but it's got to be nerve-wracking after a while.
I thought of it as I have cousins who are on the police force and how the wives, when they say goodbye to their husbands every day they go to work, because they're police officers and depending on their job in the force, it's extremely dangerous for them. So I took that kind of correlation based on the limited experience I have towards this sort of thing. I think having one character represent that for the cast makes a lot of sense. And I think Kathleen Quinlan hit it out of the park. She took a role that could be very one note and found ways to really nuance it throughout the whole movie. I'm constantly impressed with how she takes this role and what she does with it.
Yeah, she was nominated for a Oscar for this, as was Ed Harris. Tom Hanks did not get a chance to three-peat. He wasn't even nominated for it. But she does do a lot. This is where I thought I was seeing overt audience manipulation. But Jim Lovell and his wife Marilyn did a commentary track for this movie, plus reading Lovell's book. She really did have this fear. She really did just have a bad feeling about this. When her wedding ring goes down the drain in the hotel, she did drop her ring in a shower in the hotel. It didn't go down the drain. It just got caught in the trap and she picked it back up. But it did all happen like this. And so it's weird because it's so ticking the boxes of how to tell a drama and how to foreshadow. The fact that it has its basis in reality is oddly convenient. I mean, I don't want to say that as a backhanded way, but it really does feel like a cliche that actually happened.
I agree with you. It certainly does seem like it's too good to be true, and it's kind of like screenwriting 101 in a sense that, you have to do all these things. And yes, they have to for this movie. And other movies, I don't mind so much. I mean, I've seen this movie like a dozen times. Like, for me, I really enjoy these scenes only because I've seen it so many times and I love the nuances and I love how things are called back. But yes, I completely see that if this was a movie I only seen once or twice, I'd be maybe dinging this a little bit, that this is almost too pat. Too many things are, as you said, ticking off boxes that would be annoying to me. I'm giving it a pass here, calling myself out on it.
Yeah, I mean, if you took a step back and looked at this as a non-historical event, is this movie too on the nose? Is it setting up things too perfectly? I would think, yeah, maybe it's coming off a little bit hokey, but since this is based on true real events, you're right, it's almost too perfect for not telling this as a dramatic story.
And then we do also have a little bit of made-up drama here, but still foreshadowing as we get, I think, one scene with the character of Lovell's youngest son, Jeffrey, who's asking, are you going to burn up like the guys in Apollo 1? And Lovell gives a reassuring talk, and playing this young son is a old, now playing friend from the mid-90s, Miko Hughes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Miko Hughes was Gage in the 1989 Pet Sematary, and then delivered that memorable performance in Wes Craven's New Nightmare as the little boy, Heather Langenkamp's son.
Yeah. Look, this scene here with Tom Hanks talking to the kid, this is as hokey as it gets for me in this movie. However, later on, when the kid hears about his dad's accident and says, was it the door? I'm like, there we go. There's the payoff. And that line reading gets me every time. Was it the door? Because, that's perfect Ron Howard setup and hit it out of the park with that. But this scene is hokey. However, more exposition for all of us to understand the procedures in space, and having to explain it to a child, and having a tour, giving a tour to people looking at the space stuff. These are all gimmicks, kind of like Mr. DNA in Jurassic Park. These are tried and true ways to talk to the audience like they're children to explain the procedures of what's going on.
Yeah, and kudos to them for doing it this way. It could have been very boring exposition. It could have been some old documentary footage and stuff like that. But I like the way that they're kind of mixing it up here with the different ways of getting us the information that we need to know as a viewer in 1995 about a almost 25-year-old mission at this point.
And, there's going to be a little bit of interpersonal drama as Mattingly got exposed to measles, strangely relevant 30 years later. And because he wasn't vaccinated and never had measles, they can't send Mattingly.
I mean, how about a scene here? I mean, this is amazing. To watch Gary Sinise think on screen. I just loved him in this scene. And then Bill Paxton at the end of the scene kind of ruins it for me. But the two of them in this scene are just remarkable. I don't know how other way to say it. How do you play Heartbreak any better than this? This scene gets me every time.
Yeah, it seems like he very quickly goes through like the 5 stages of acceptance.
Yes.
He's, going through bargaining. Let's go talk to the guys and see if we can convince them. And here, Jim tried the same thing. Lovell was trying to convince his superiors, let Mattingly go anyway. And the superiors are like, Mattingly's not going. And maybe if you keep pushing it, you aren't going either. So now Lovell has to be telling Mattingly it was my call. It wasn't his call at all, but he's being a stand-up guy and taking that heat from his friend.
Yeah, we get to see a little bit of the politicking that I was talking about earlier here, too, because, Jim is brought into a room where I think it's some higher-ups at NASA and also the PR arm of NASA, too, getting him on the page with this, basically saying, look, he's not going, and if you don't like that, you can stay, too, and we can replace the whole crew. And that's some of the things that you don't know go on behind the scenes.
Yeah, that PR guy is wonderfully smarmy. We've seen him in a million things. Xander Berkeley. And always plays this kind of guy, but what a perfect guy for this role. And he comes across so, understandably, no, we got to this and that, but he still looks like a smarmy man. Good casting on that guy.
The funny thing about Xander Berkeley is I've seen him in so many movies, and I couldn't tell you who he played in any of them.
Well, most notably for probably the three of us he was the stepfather of John Connor in Terminator 2.
Okay, the mean asshole guy, yeah.
The guy who gets killed through the milk, yeah.
Yeah, like I said, it gives us an insight into some of the behind the scenes of the space program that the average person might not think about.
A thing that I didn't know until I saw this movie is to say goodbye to the astronauts, they have to see each other and say goodbye across a road, distanced away from each other so no one does get sick at the last minute when going into space. That's a kind of a neat thing.
Yep, not true. They do that now, and it started with the space shuttle missions.
Okay.
But it did not happen with the Apollo 13. But it is good to have dramatic closure. Marilyn said she wasn't going to come. We see Jim standing there lonely and dejected, and Marilyn does show up, but it shows distance and isolation and really sends home the themes, even if it's not entirely historically timed right.
Okay, then. Well, I stand corrected. But little things, next day is launch day, like Bill Paxton spitting out gum into the technician's hand. The gigantic video cameras they have there. They look like the loaders from Aliens. They're so big. It's like these little details that they really, at this point, at the launch, when they start getting ready and put their suits on and get everything ready, and Mission Control gets introduced a little bit, you really get submersed in 1970, which the clothing was the only thing really getting us in the time period. But from here on out, and it starts here, you really get a sense of 1970s technology, 1970s know-how, and it puts a real fine point on they don't have the technology or stuff they have now. This is, by comparison, rudimentary.
Yeah, there was a line earlier that kind of gave me a chuckle, and I think even in 95 it was meant to be a chuckle, where they said, imagine in the future where we'll have computers that can fit in less than a room, So here we are carrying around computers in our pocket that are more powerful than the ones they use to launch these missions. But yeah, it does set a tone for where we are in time. And it brings a question to mind, too, that I had. How much of this launch sequence is actual footage? How much of it is CGI made for the movie? Because it looks incredible, and some of it just felt like there's no way they could have got a camera there that wasn't destroyed.
Yeah, it looks so historically accurate, and this is all recreation. No footage from the actual launch was used. This is all special effects, mostly practical, mixed with a little bit of CGI enhancement of things like the fire from the rockets and whatnot. But in 1995, CGI, if it was being used, it was being used poorly. We'll be talking about that when we review Species. But here it was used sparingly, and they had practical models and then some effects on the shots to make it look grainy and make it look like TV footage from the time, to the point that some astronauts asked Ron Howard, where did you get that footage? I'd never seen that piece of footage before. And Ron Howard had to tell them none of this was actual footage. We did this all in a lab. And this is where I want to credit the movie across the board. Every special effect, every set, every light feels real and completely engrosses me in this movie. At no point am I thinking these are guys on a set. I'm not thinking about what studio they put the big Mission Control in and all of that. I am completely absorbed into the world of this movie and firmly believe that these guys are up in space and that a rocket took off and that this is an actual rocket launch we're seeing.
I completely 100% agree with you. A few things I do know about the behind the scenes on this one was that NASA offered them to use Mission Control, and they said, no, we don't want to. We build our own sets. They built everything for this. It just was remarkable. I don't know how accurate it is, the details, but it sure the heck looks real. But this whole thing with this rocket taking off, they went through the step-by-step of what it takes to launch a rocket. So many people having to give their say, all the people having to say yes. Just the remarkable remarkable bureaucracy to get that up into space is unbelievable. And this is just starting.
And here we're introduced to Ed Harris as Gene Kranz, who's going to be in Mission Control and the face of Mission Control. There's a lot of people in Mission Control. Clint Howard's going to be there shouting stuff. There's a doctor shouting stuff. All these people are running around. But the only one we're really going to know is Gene. And Ed Harris is the one who's going to be shouting the orders on the ground the whole time.
He's the guy who has to make the decisions. Everyone has to go to him, and when he makes the call, that is the call. And he has to take everyone's opinion into consideration, and somehow he knows which ones to listen to and when. Look, this is not an easy role to play either. This guy can be extremely two-dimensional, and Ed Harris takes this role like Kathleen Quinlan did and finds a way to humanize it without it being crazy over the top. Ed Harris is in this scene, and then subsequently finds a way to build this guy from the ground up, and you really, really care about what he thinks. Like, when he makes a decision, you're like, okay, that has to be the right decision. He just imbues confidence and knowledge, but the thing is, he's making up as he goes along, just like everybody else. It's a great performance, and we'll talk more as we go here, but love it. Love his performance here.
I totally agree. I mean, if I would stop and think about whoever's in control of Mission Control, for the most part, it kind of strikes me the same way like a conductor of an orchestra does. It's like, do we really need the guy with the stick up there? These guys are the ones playing the music. They know what's going on. But no, Ed Harris really convinces me here that they do need a quarterback here, and he's very calm and in control and making the calls.
Yeah, I really like his performance here. There's a couple of moments that really Ed Harris just shows the right emotion at the right time. From what little Ron Howard talked about Ed Harris, it seemed like Ed Harris wasn't a very collaborative actor with his director, but he didn't necessarily need to be either. He looked at some real footage and said to Ron Howard, "Is that what you're wanting?" And Ron Howard went, "Yeah." And then Ed Harris just delivered it. And Howard was very impressed with his performance, as am I. The only thing, I'm like, if you wanted to shorten this movie just a little, did Ed Harris need to get delivered a vest from his wife that I guess is part of a lucky tradition that happens before every launch? You can't launch until he gets his vest.
It felt like there was something more there to it, too, like maybe on the cutting room floor, because it seemed like he was a little surprised by the color being white, like that was supposed to mean something. But yeah, they spent enough time showing us him getting this package, slowly opening it, revealing it, putting it on, and then it's never brought up again.
Yeah, I don't really get it either. The best I can come up with is they're trying a little bit of anticipation, like who is going to receive this box? Who is it going to be? Who's it going to be? That's the best I can come up with. I thought it was, a minute of screen time that they could have really just not done with, because you don't really need to humanize this man beyond what he's already going to do. Like, a gift from his wife is not necessary for this particular character. We see plenty of him being a human being, but also, as Justin said, the quarterback of this mission with what happens subsequently in this film. So, whatever. They tried to give him a human interest aspect of it. Ron Howard likes these kinds of details. I keep dinging Ron Howard here and there for these kind of things because I've seen his movies so many times, and I see tropes and I see things like, look, you see Spielberg movies enough, you get the same stuff, right? So you see the same playbooks, and this is definitely a Ron Howard kind of moment.
Absolutely it is. I also want to just call out this launch. It's been hitting me the whole movie, but specifically at this launch, you know who's brought their absolute A game. And I feel like a lot of people brought their B plus game to this. You know, I think Ron Howard's basically a B plus student, but who brought their A game and just impressed the hell out of me is James Horner with this score.
Yes, absolutely right.
This is amazing music that he hits every scene perfectly. The suspense music during the tense scenes, the anthems that play during the hurrah moments, including this takeoff, the opening credits theme. It's really an inspiring score.
Yeah, I completely agree. You're right. There's just a hint of patriotism in some of this music, and there's drums and soaring horns. But yeah, I will compare it to Star Wars, where the score becomes so much a part of the story that it's doing its job when you don't notice it. It's setting a tone, and it's letting you know as a viewer that, yes, this is an important scene, this is a tense scene, and I guess what I'm saying is it's doing its job well.
Yeah, James Horner we talked about him during Star Trek 2. This is the right man for this job. There's no other way to say it. Arnie's 100% correct. I have notes here about when the score hits perfectly because he hits all the right notes. Ba-dum, boom. But it's true.
But yeah, it's optimistic, it's patriotic as they close the doors, and even we cut to Gary Sinise watching them take off and having to miss that shot.
He's in a car watching by himself on a cliffside or something, and that's haunting. Like, he wanted no one else to be there. He does more not saying anything in this movie than a lot of people can. I just love this performance in this movie. Here from the movie, going on for the rest of the movie, the detail, I have no idea. I don't know space travel that well. I've read these books and things, but the amount of detail that goes into space flight from here on out is unbelievable. There's going to be a cute little human interest scene when they video them in space. No one wants to run the broadcast, whatever, but even there, the details of what space travel, what it takes to fly in space, what their missions are, the controls, the dialogue, the procedures, it's fascinating. I don't understand how on earth these guys said all this technobabble so convincingly. It's amazing. Like, I have no idea what they're saying, but I'm like, okay, wow, that's amazing.
And I guess that is where we got to credit some of the actors here, is Ron Howard really wanted to use accurate terminology and not explain it to the audience so it does sound like technobabble. And so the actors have to deliver these lines in ways that we know, oh crap, this is bad, or oh, this is good, without even truly understanding what it is they're saying, unless you've read Lovell's book where everything is explained in minutia.
Right. And even from a technical standpoint, I'm sitting here watching this getting educated. I mean, I guess maybe the older generation who followed the space race closer knew all the stages of a multi-stage rocket takeoff. But in my mind, a rocket goes up and some parts of it continue on. But yeah, just watching the different stages of the main rocket breaking off, and now we have the lunar module, the capsule, and the orbiter and all that stuff. It's fascinating to me. I never really thought too deeply on how much it takes and how many different stages there are to not only breaking Earth's atmosphere, heading towards the moon, staying on course, how many different parts break off and become useful here and there. It's all very fascinating to watch this and kind of learn how this used to go down.
And credit to the screenwriter and Ron Howard for taking the time when they do the training missions earlier. They show us how hard it is to thread this needle of putting the lunar lander back onto the module and using that little square, I guess, viewfinder or scope or whatever that is. That's all they have to line things up. That comes up later in the movie too. So they cleverly set that up so we do understand how hard it is. But here, in this part of the movie, when the jolts come and they get jolted forward and they get jolted back and the things are floating and all these little details, how they go to the bathroom in space, how they vent the urine.
And a lot of this stuff was filmed in 22-second bursts because Ron Howard was trying to figure out, how do I film weightlessness? We can do wires, but that's not going to look right, all of this. And, he's talking to Steven Spielberg, as one does, just hanging around, chatting with Steve.
On the Universal lot in the commissary. Yeah.
Yeah, Steve, these problems we have, these everyday problems that everyone can relate to. And Steve says, well, why don't you just call up NASA? Because they have a KC-135 plane that they use to create weightlessness.
I think that's the right call, because I was sitting here watching this wondering, is this wires? Are we at a point in technology where they can digitally remove wires? Because it does look very natural.
Yeah, it's amazing, in fact, how they look so realistic. I remember when they were talking about this, when everyone was doing the press for it, this was a talking point. This and the ring falling down the drain were constantly talked about, but it's still fascinating that actors get to go into this and then for 20 seconds at a time have to perform without blowing chunks, right? I mean, how many times can you go up there without your body just saying, no, thank you?
What I'm most impressed about isn't that these Hollywood types could get NASA to let them use this plane for a long time, but I think it was Kevin Bacon on one of the features says, we only did it for the shots where you see our full body and we're all floating like that, but for the close-ups, we're on a set. And I'm like, You know, that made me think. You built a set inside an airplane that perfectly matches a set you built in a soundstage that perfectly matches the real spacecraft. That you could build that in an airplane in the space allotted is amazing, and that the shots match so damn perfectly that I could never tell when they were on this plane or when they were on a set. It's incredible, actually.
All of these little details are just, it's run-of-the-mill for these folks. What's amazing about this is incredible stuff, but at this point in the movie, it's all run-of-the-mill space travel.
Which is why it's not even being carried on the networks. We get a shot of Jim's mother wondering why they're not showing her son going to the moon, and it's because they got to the moon already, and so people just are bored with this.
And that's, of course, Ron Howard's mom. Howard number 2, for those keeping count. But Ron Howard's mom, of course, is the old lady in the chair.
And there'll be a third.
There'll be a third later, yeah.
Keep that Howard count going.
He does that. He hires people he knows, and he hires his family. And, you know, that's great.
But he said his mother was an actress who had gotten back into acting, and somebody suggested your mom would be good for this role, but he wasn't sure if she could pull it off. He made her audition.
Wow.
Well, okay then.
Sorry, Mom. Our people will get a hold of your people.
Yeah. I heard she held out for more money, too. She was, anyway.
I do like this inclusion of their public perception at the time. I feel like after watching this and watching The Right Stuff and all that, and I've brought it up a few times, I feel like it lets our generation off the hook a little bit with the way we were brought up as space travel being somewhat routine, right? Because I do feel a little guilty after watching these movies that it's like, yeah, why were we not paying more attention? Why does this not matter as much? And this movie shows that the public had already kind of moved on from this type of thing. We've been to the moon twice. It's just another mission. It doesn't need to be carried live like all the other ones.
And they do have a problem during launch. Not a big one, but one of the 5 engines goes out and the other 4 are able to compensate. But Lovell is going to say here, well, I guess we had our problem, got that out of the way fast. And there's our little glitch, and hopefully everything else goes smoothly. And then a little bit more tension because they have to dock with the lunar module Aquarius and Swigert, the new guy on the team. Some of those simulations didn't go so well with Swigert as they did with Mattingly. And so there's a little bit of holding your breath as can Kevin Bacon pull it off? And, he was talking about docking and the probe sliding in. Is he really going to be able to slide it in? Scrapes on the side a little bit, but it goes in.
The side eye that Bacon gives to Hanks was brilliant. Like, he indicates to the other 2 men, yes, I know you don't trust me. Watch this. It was really kind of great. It's very subtle. If you want to watch it again, you'll see. It gives a little bit of a look to Tom Hanks and then concentrates completely on the mission. I don't know how an actor does that besides instinctually. That was a really nice moment for Kevin Bacon. I'm going on and on about the acting in this movie. In a movie like this one that has hokey written all over it for 1,000 different reasons, the acting is making this work. Much like a Marvel movie, it works because the actors are that good at what they're doing, so you don't notice, so that the Avengers Endgame doesn't turn out like Corman's Fantastic Four. And those actors might be nothing but respect for them, but that movie was not given the same care as an Avengers MCU movie. These guys here are taking such care with their characters, and the performances are so strong, making this movie as strong as it is and as gripping as it is. It's all performances.
Yeah, because what this movie's telling us is that these astronauts have been working together for years and they trust each other implicitly, and to have a different guy who's been training just as hard but with different men come in last minute like this, there is going to be a little bit of tension. Can we trust him to be able to do what our other guy we knew could do? So yeah, that adds a little bit more tension and drama into this already tension-filled mission.
Mm-hmm.
But it does seem mission as usual because we're going to jump to day 3. Jim Lovell is doing a TV broadcast that no networks are carrying, and Marilyn had to go down to the space station to even see it at all.
I felt this. I really did, because Jim is giving a performance for what he thinks is the world watching, and nobody is, right? It's just being recorded, and they might show some of it on the news later on. But in his mind, he's talking to the whole world. This is as big of a deal as Armstrong landing on the moon.
Yeah, I mean, I like the line in this movie, we make going to the moon as exciting as a trip to Pittsburgh.
No offense to Pittsburgh, of course, our Pittsburgh listeners, we love you. I learned something watching this. Did the Beatles really break up on April 13th, 1970? Is that accurate? Because I think it's right around this time, but is it actually the same day? Or is she just still reeling from the news like the day before or something? I mean, that's amazing that all these horrible things happened.
I Googled this, and Lennon left in September 69, but the generally considered date is when McCartney announced he was leaving in April 10th, 1970.
Right there. So, wow, another historically accurate moment here another tragedy of a different sort happening. The Beatles break up right around the same time. It's a harbinger of death.
Yoko caused the Apollo 13.
So many things had to line up just right.
Exactly.
You know, it was her hitting that sour-ass note that caused the tank to rupture. You know, the daughter arc of this movie does make me roll my eyes. Her dad is in space. She only cares about the Beatles. And then each scene of the family, we're going to cut to this daughter. She doesn't even have too many lines. They cut to her like she's the family dog. And she starts off every scene just angsty and upset. And then she finally gets a little bit worried. And then at the climax of the film, she's finally going to cry in her mother's arms.
Yeah, that comes from a place of real knowledge, I feel, though. Like, that's exactly how a teenage girl would react. You know, if she's feeling scared for her dad, she's not going to show it. She's going to act too cool for school until it actually becomes overwhelming and the emotion comes out.
And Bryce Dallas Howard was a teenager around this time that Ron Howard was dealing with, so...
Well, maybe she didn't make the audition.
But strangely, yeah, she didn't get the cut. Maybe Grandma got the audition, but Bryce didn't get it. Amazing. I feel bad for Bryce, you know? She didn't get the job.
She had to actually read Miko Hughes' lines after Miko Hughes hit his time and the kid had to be taken off the set.
Oh.
So when they did Tom Hanks' side of that conversation, it was Bryce Dallas.
Oh, okay, there you go. So the boys stand in. How nice. All right.
I mean, mixed within all this family drama and tension and all that stuff that's going on, they do take a few moments here and there to be funny, right? Like, there's talk of it's time to eat, and are you hungry? And one of them says, I could eat the ass out of a dead rhinoceros. And Tom Hanks kind of looks at him like, yeah, okay.
Strangely enough, apparently, Gary Busey was visiting the set, and Bill Paxton said, Gary, give me a line. And that was what Gary Busey came up with, is eating the ass out of a dead rhinoceros.
That makes too much sense to not be true.
Doesn't it, though?
There's some context that I did not have, because I was wondering where the hell they come up with that. Now that explanation makes 100% sense. Unbelievable. You can't make this stuff up.
We get to see the evacuation process of pee coming outside of the station. You know, they make a big shot of how glorious it looks, the yellow droplets floating through the vacuum of space.
It looks cool, but they're also setting it up because later on they're not going to even have the electricity to evacuate their own urine.
Right.
So in addition to a cool shot that is educational, because I think that's like one of the most common questions people get asked about when you're an astronaut is, how do you go to the bathroom on a spaceship?
Would have it been too on the nose if it was fecal matter and hitting a fan? Because that's what's about to happen here. The shit's about to hit the fan.
Good point. I didn't think of that. Yes, you're maybe, even for Ron Howard, too much on the nose, maybe.
Yeah, Jack Swigert is told, stir the oxygen tanks, which from what I can tell is literally flipping one switch. And we get this shot, and it made me think of like Fight Club, years before Fight Club. You know how the opening of Fight Club, you're following all that stuff around as the music blares. You get to follow this spark as it goes through the wires and in the panels and down to the oxygen tank. You know, so when I say it's reminding me of Fight Club, I'm crediting Ron Howard here for being innovative and doing it before the movie that I think makes it iconic. He beat Fincher to the punch and has this really cool shot of when things go wrong.
Yeah, it actually ramps up some tension. It actually also shows how innocuous the actual tragic accident was. It was something simple as you flick a switch, a spark goes on, and it hits one thing, and something that for whatever reason didn't work. It was something so simple. It wasn't like a meteor hit us. It wasn't laser guns from the Millennium Falcon. It was something as simple as flicking a switch, causing a spark that made this entire thing happen. And how great a shot was it? It seemed animated, it seemed heightened, but it was completely appropriate. it. Great way to kick off the tragedies that were about to happen.
It's so fast moving. I imagine if I freeze framed it, it probably wouldn't look as good as it does when it's just a few seconds that you aren't expecting moving so fast on that screen in front of you.
It's also one of those things, too, that in my mind, I always want to think that NASA and all the engineers have everything so well thought through that there would be no chance at all of a spark being able to be caused. Like, they would have these wires insulated and double insulated and tapped down so tight that there's no chance of this happening. But according to this animation, I mean, it just looked like some hokey loose wires that were rattling around.
And it causes one to blow and the other to leak. And we get this tense moment of ground control saying, turn off the fuel cells. And I don't know quite what that means or what the danger is of doing that, but I'm getting from these actors' performances, that is bad.
Yeah, there's a really great shot, too. Clint Howard is the guy who comes up with the idea of shutting down the fuel cells to mitigate the issue. And there's a really great shot of his computer screens filling up his glasses. And so you're getting the moment of there's like so much information in front of this guy, he has to make a call. A really brilliant shot by Howard there. Bravo to Ron Howard there.
Credit where credit's due, absolutely. I think he does have some really good shots in this film.
Oh my God, yes, he does. And again, we're talking about a bunch of nerds in a room talking about techno-babble, and somehow he gets us encapsulated in these moments. Right around the same time, they talk about we're seeing venting into space, and then everybody goes quiet. Like the entire room goes quiet, and then all of a sudden, there's bustle, and everyone gets to work.
Mm-hmm.
It's unbelievable! And how he captures it in the screen really tells you, this is really bad.
And I don't think we can not mention the iconic line that Tom Hanks gets here, Houston, we have a problem. That line just is burned into cinematic history.
Yeah, it's one of those things that it has become something people say in movies after this. If you hear that line, it's because of this movie, and it's been said 1,000 times since. It's just, when you hear that now in this movie, it feels as iconic to me as Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore. Like, it's no place like home. Like, it's like a Wizard of Oz kind of line to me, because it's that big a deal.
Mm-hmm. So what Mission Control comes up with is to use the lunar module or the LEM as a lifeboat. And it's not meant for that, but they have to basically abandon ship and turn off all the power on the Apollo 13 in order to conserve power needed for them to land. And everybody gets in the LEM. They thought they'd be getting in there to land on the moon, and instead they're getting in there just to survive. But the way it's played, I don't think these guys are worried about their life so much as they're kind of disappointed they can't go to the moon. They're going to film the moon and be looking longingly at the moon, especially Jim Lovell. We're going to get a lot of quiet shots where Tom Hanks is just emoting but not talking. And me watching this, I'm like, dude, your life is in danger. And yet they all seem to be looking more at the lost opportunity than at the reality of their situation.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what they've been training for years and years and years, and this is the moment of realization that it's not going to happen. And that realization could have happened on the ground, like it did for Gary Sinise's character, but here it's happening on the way to the moon. And Tom Hanks' character even says, we just lost the moon. And that's his acceptance of it, and now he gets into crisis mitigation mode.
I think he goes through moments of disappointment. The other two guys hadn't been up there before, so they're really excited about seeing the moon so close. I mean, he literally got that close to the moon, and you can't land on it? I don't know if there's anything comparable in our lives. It gets so close to something that is so out of reach to most people to have it taken away from you at the last minute. I mean, good Lord. It's literally outside your window, and you can't do a thing about it.
Yeah, it's like getting your family on a plane, renting a car, and driving by Disneyland, right? Like, there it is, kids.
But for Jim Lovell, this is his second time, because he's already orbited the moon once. So here it is. This was supposed to be his time to touch down. And I think we get that moment where everybody's looking at the moon, or the three guys are looking at the moon and talking about how great it would be. And finally, it's Jim Lovell who has to rally them and say, I don't know about you guys, but now I'm going to focus on getting home. He has his moment of loss, his moment of longing, and then he refocuses himself and puts to the mission at hand, survival.
It's also notable, but besides the fuel and besides the energy conservation, oxygen is a huge deal too. So the LEM can support them with the oxygen because they lost so much oxygen because the oxygen tanks blew. So on top of not having the power, on top of not having the fuel, they have to conserve oxygen, and it becomes a major factor.
Yeah, there's a lot of little emergencies they're going to have. We have to course correct the ship. How do we do that? We need to get a new oxygen filter. How do we do that? And we just intercut the people at mission control coming up with stuff, MacGyvering things, being put on a table. This is the exact what they have up there. Figure out how to literally get a square peg in a round hole for an air filter.
For the CO2, because the LEM is only meant to hold 2 people, not 3, and therefore they have too much carbon dioxide. And around the same time, they also come up with that they're not going to have enough power to land. They have to turn everything off, as Arnie mentioned earlier. And here is my one big beef of the movie. There is a room full of nerds, perfectly cast nerds, everywhere, glasses, bad shirts, and they're such great actors. And who comes up with the idea about the power? The guy who looks like Dean Cain, Superman himself. He looks like the most gorgeous man in the room. And he's the savior of the mission because he's the movie star looking guy. I'm like, come on, of all the people, come on. I mean, come on. Like, it's just the guy with the cool hair and he looks like Clark Kent. And I'm like, come on. So yeah, that's my one big, huge beef of casting. And he's good. Give the guy credit. He's a good actor. I'm just saying, he doesn't look the part of a NASA nerd.
Yeah, and every time we cut back to Mission Control, I'm picking out another character actor here and there that I recognize, and you could have pulled one of those. I mean, Marty McFly's brother's in here, and he doesn't get a line at all. I recognize him. There's another actor that I had to look up, Arnie, because the voice sounded very familiar, and his face kind of looked familiar, and I'm like, we have just talked about this guy really recently, and it turns out it's Ray McKinnon, the guy who plays Jenkins in The Continental, the sniper. He's one of these guys, and he gets a few lines.
Yeah, we recorded our review of The Continental. Listeners can hear that next week.
Oh, fair enough.
And you know who else is in here is 2 character actors I really like. One is Gabe Jarrett, star of Real Genius.
Oh.
Is one of the guys. I don't even think his character has a name. He's just called White Team Guidance, Navigation, and Controls System Engineer, but he's around there. The one who stuck out to me, I'll be honest, I didn't see Gabe Jarrett. I just saw him in the credits and I went, Real Genius, and I got happy. But the one I did see is an actor named Christian Clemenson. He's the flight surgeon. This is an Emmy Award-winning actor for Boston Legal, where he played a guy with Asperger's syndrome named Hans. I loved Boston Legal. It was a very underrated, underseen show. And when they added Christian Clemenson's character to that show, it just added so much fun and pizzazz to it. And so I was happy to see him here in an early small role.
The guy who stuck out to me was Jim Meskimen, who I know as an impressionist. If you go on YouTube and type in Jim Meskimen, do the best you can with spelling. He does a lot of impressions. He does like a Vegas act with a bunch of impressions, and he's in there too. So yeah, it's a wonderful amalgam of all these actors that we recognize. Oh, he's that guy in that thing, and this model guy is the guy who's a savior of, who works with Ken Mattingly, Gary Sinise on how to fix the power issue.
Yeah, well, are you going to give that to Clint Howard? I mean, Clint Howard here chewing up everything. He is so perfectly cast in this, though. I know Ron Howard always gives his brother roles, but rarely is Clint Howard so perfect for a role as he is in here.
Sure.
I agree completely, and of course he later spoofs this with Austin Powers, Bob's Big Boy, right? So, yeah.
Yep.
And I guess, I didn't know this, Clint Howard had some problems with the IRS, and so when Kevin Bacon is saying he forgot to file his taxes and Clint Howard takes that very seriously, it's like, they don't joke around with this stuff.
That was a fun bit, too, the whole IRS thing. Nixon said, you're most definitely out of the country. That was pretty funny. I did enjoy that.
I mean, story-wise, we keep cutting back to Mission Control, though, to show that they're in chaos, too, but they're only transmitting positivity towards our imperiled astronauts, right? They know that they're in a situation, and they're not sugarcoating it, but they're not letting them know every step of every way that they don't have a plan yet.
This is where they go and get Mattingly back, as you mentioned, Brock. Sinise is in here because they need somebody to start simulating a landing with the power they have. And so, yeah, Sinise really has a lot to do with this character. You're right, Brock. He is a far more interesting character than either of the other 2 astronauts on that ship. It's like, if you can't be Lovell, this one has the pressure on him. You know, the other guys up there are just kind of following orders and doing what they're told and hoping they get home alive. alive. It's Sinise who has to innovate and run tests and reduce the amperage again and again.
Yeah, he is given so much to work with, and the way he makes it sound so easy and looks so determined, I fascinate at what he's doing here. Like, look, doing math has never been so fascinating on screen until A Beautiful Mind. It's the only other time I can think of when people do math on screen and say, oh, maybe Hidden Figures is also a good example. It's rarely is fascinating. I corrected myself in real time, folks.
It's never been done.
Except for the other two times.
Yes, exactly. There you go. But it's fascinating. I've seen this movie, I can't tell you how many times. And watching these guys solve these problems is remarkable. Watching Ed Harris mitigate all of it is fascinating to me. And then the determination of Ken Mattingly in that pod. Watching the three guys up in space try to figure out their problems is interesting. Also of note, they didn't bring Gary Sinise up there, Ken Mattingly, because they were afraid he's going to get sick. And then Bill Paxton's character gets sick. And who knows why. They don't really tell us how he got sick. But he's running a fever, and he's clearly not well.
They say it without saying it. He says that his pecker hurts and he's blaming The Bachelor for giving him the clap by sharing a urinary tube. It turns out it was a urinary tract infection.
Oh, I see. I didn't know that. And they didn't really call it out very well, but okay.
No, you're either supposed to look it up or just infer from the sore penis and then the fever that it's a bad UTI.
And no cranberry juice on board.
Only Tang, and damn it, that doesn't help. So in this, there's one bit of melodrama that I'm shocked is real, and one bit of melodrama that I'm shocked isn't real. And I'll give you guys the two bits of melodrama and see if you can tell me which one was the real one.
Ooh, a fun game. Okay.
Okay, in space, the three astronauts start to bicker a little bit, primarily between Swigert and Hayes, as Swigert was the one who flipped the switch, and everybody's getting on each other's nerves just a little bit. And when the thing comes up that we were only prepared for two people's oxygen, Kevin Bacon, feeling like the odd man out, gets that good line, I guess I'll just hold my breath. So we've got that melodrama going on. Meanwhile, on Earth, Jim's wife, Marilyn, has a whole bunch of reporters descending and asking if they can put up a receiver on her house. And she tells them they don't put one piece of equipment on my lawn. And if they have a problem with that, you can take it up with my husband. He'll be home Friday.
Ooh.
Which is real? Which is fake?
Interesting. I want to think that the astronauts are professional enough to keep it together and not get on each other's nerves like that, but this is an extenuating circumstance. But I feel like the condemnation of the media thing is a little early in our history, so maybe that was more of a 90s flair.
I think that the bickering, I'm sure they did bicker because it's a horribly tense moment, but I have to think that the press on the lawn is fabricated. So I'm going to go with, for the sake of the question, I'm going with the Kathleen Quinlan scene as being the fake moment.
And that is not right. Marilyn Lovell, actually, it's a direct quote out of Jim Lovell's book about if you have a problem with that, you can take it up with my husband. He'll be home Friday.
No kidding.
Huh.
I couldn't believe that really happened because I kept thinking they were trying to find things for this actress to do and ways to show the wife in distress and just come up with ways to elongate that when that really happened. And these guys, as you said, Justin, were professional enough that they did not blame each other or bicker or anything like that up there that anyone will ever admit to. Unlike the scene which did happen and is in the movie where they leave their communicator on and Mission Control's like, we can hear you. But if there was any bickering, it was when that box was off and no one will ever admit to it outside of that capsule.
Yeah, and later on, then Tom Hanks says, "Is the Fox on?" No. Okay, Mission Control, we're here. Like, it was really funny. Yeah. Around this time, too, one of my favorite bits in the movie is Ron Howard's mother, who's playing Jim Lovell's mother, is there, and they decide to placate her with having Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong babysit her. And then she says to them, this is Buzz Aldrin, this is Neil Armstrong. She's, "Oh, are you guys in the space program, too?" I thought that was really fun. A perfectly delivered line, and a moment of levity that is needed at this point in the movie. So who knows if that actually happened, but who cares? That's a good bit.
I guess it really did happen that Marilyn had to go visit the mother in a nursing home. She'd recently had a stroke. She was a single mother, raised Jim Lovell on her own, and they did have to go. And Jim goes into it a lot in his book that Marilyn wanted to make it a point that everybody found out from her or from somebody before they found it out on the news. So calling the school where their son was in military school, making sure that the staff at the nursing home don't turn on the news until they can go over there and see grandma. All of this stuff is factually accurate. And yeah, it does help drive home. Back what I was saying earlier when I said Paxton and Bacon were underdeveloped, here we see the family who cares about Jim, who wants to get Jim home. And so we become empathetic through that kind of Greek choir presentation. Of course, we've credited Ron Howard where it's due. One moment of Ron Howard's filmmaking that made me roll my eyes a little bit was the symbolism as the guys are kind of freezing in the lem and there's no power. And we see this tape recorder floating as its batteries are dying and it's playing Blue Moon. Yeah. It's like, okay, a little on the nose.
Yeah, that stuck out, but I think it's helping move it along and it gives us a sense of what's happening here. You know, things are slowly dying off here. Our astronauts are slowly dying off. They're almost frozen solid. Their food is hot dogs that are frozen solid. They can't eat. They're having trouble peeing. Everything is going wrong.
And on top of all that, they have to do a burn because, as earlier they mentioned, that they were knocked off course so badly that they had to do a burn, and it was really exciting. They had to do it without any instrumentation. And what a burn is basically is like they have to use the jet, right, the fuel or whatever, to right their course so they don't hit the earth and skip off like a rock on a pond, or they don't come in too steep and they burn up in the atmosphere. It's one of those things that in space travel we don't really think about at all, is the logistics of getting through the Earth's atmosphere. And they did a really good way of explaining what they needed to do and why, and made for an exciting little vignette. And they were coming into shallow because all the calculations were made because they thought that the capsule was going to have more weight in it because of moon rocks. If it's not one thing, it's another. You have to calculate the weight of rocks.
The Weight of Rocks sounds like the title of another Ron Howard movie. But I agree with you. I do think that through the editing and the filmmaking, they do a good job of these Rube Goldbergian type of disasters where, as we mentioned earlier, I'll just reiterate, not entirely sure why A is happening to B is happening to C, but James Horner's score and these actors are selling me on the tension of the moments. At no point do I ever feel this movie drags. You know, it takes 50 minutes to get to the Houston we have a problem, but the stuff on Earth is so interesting. And then after Houston we have a problem is about an hour and a half of disaster after disaster. But it's, I don't want to use the word exciting, but it's engrossing. I suppose the reason I'm not thrilled, and I always feel like this film is at arm's distance from me, is because I know how the story ends, and so there's no real stakes in it. I know that each of these scenes is going to end with man triumphing over adversity, and so I don't feel the drama that I would in, like, say, Gravity is a film that I would give a complete 5-star review to and has me on the edge of my seat the whole time. And this movie, not entirely.
I agree with you on Gravity, but I find this movie riveting because of how it makes you obviously never 100% forget, but it does make you wonder, are they going to get home? Some of the biggest and best movies and even theater pieces, you know how it resolves, but the journey of how they get to that resolution is captivating. And I'm never bored either in this one, but I'm thoroughly impressed with, even though I do know the ending, the fact of how they got there is riveting.
Right, and some of the stakes that they bring up that you might not have been privy to at the time, where, you know, if they don't hit the Earth's atmosphere at the perfect right angle, they could bounce right off and be flung off into space and lost forever.
Right, exactly. Like things that we take for granted that are, of course, they figured this all out, but they have to deal with the different variables. So yeah, I get what you're saying, Arnie, but like at this point also, they see the actual capsule. They see the damage for the first time of how incredibly wrecked that spaceship was and how lucky they are at this point to actually be able to even think about re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere. But they also then find out that the damage went all the way up to the heat shield. If it wasn't enough. Now the heat shield could actually be damaged, and the heat shield looks like a saucer sled, if you want to use a comparison, go sled riding on it, whatever. And they have to use that to block the Earth's atmosphere enough to get them through the Earth's atmosphere to safely land. And I'm not sure if that's fabricated at all, but what a great thing to have as a last final issue is the heat shield going to hold up? So even though they got all the way back to Earth, are they going to be able to land?
Because there was also stated concerns that the chutes might not open, they might be frozen. Even if they hit the atmosphere correctly, there was still a chance of things to go wrong.
Right. And also the condensation. There's so much, everything was frozen. And then I loved how they showed us like the droplets of water at first, and then like the water just gushing off of the panels onto their faces as their backs are to the heat shield when they enter the atmosphere, because everything was finally hot enough to melt the ice that had frozen all over their instrumentation.
Brock, it's interesting that you bring up, the idea that this movie might have heightened the dramatics at certain points. And from what I've watched and what I've read, they actually downplayed some of the dramatics here. In the first stage, when that fifth rocket booster failed to fire, and they had to make a decision on whether or not to continue outside of Earth's gravitational pull and get out of orbit, if they could do it with just 4. Well, it turns out that was kind of a lucky accident. If that fifth one had fired, they learned that there's a pogo effect on these earlier Apollo rockets, where the shaft of these things shake violently up and down. And if that fifth one had fired, there's a very good chance the whole thing would have broken apart before they left orbit. So in a certain aspect, they kind of skim over some things that were very much an issue at the time.
So you're telling me that if that rocket did fire, then they could have not even gone into space. They could have gone right back to Earth.
They would most likely have blown up.
Oh, blown up. Okay.
Yep.
Well, also, though, maybe the rocket didn't fire because of the incident. Maybe it's all connected, as you said. Maybe it's possible that that rocket didn't fire because of whatever issue that also sparked the oxygen tanks. I don't know, obviously, but that's a good point. I didn't think about what they did have to downplay to make the narrative of this work. I just figured if they're ever going to heighten anything, because also, there's like that moment of like 3 minutes where if they don't hear them by the 4th minute, they set this up in the movie. If they don't hear them come into the Earth's atmosphere by the 4th minute, they're dead. And obviously, in movie land, of course they're going to go beyond the 4 minutes, and then he says something and everyone cheers because they're back on Earth. There's a moment there when they get through re-entry and they get to Earth, and Tom Hanks says his moment that they're there. It was good to see you again. Ed Harris sits down in his chair, and it's such an amazing moment again, not saying a word. His way that his body just sits in that chair like we did it, without cheering, without anything else. He just sits down, and you feel the weight. You almost see the weight going off of his shoulders. That's acting. That is incredible. To me, again, how does one convey that moment any better? I don't know how. Not saying a word, the man conveys a novel. Amazing.
No, it is a good moment. And again, Horner's score is triumphant and blaring, and they're pulled up onto the Iwo Jima, and the real Jim Lovell cameos there as a captain on that ship who gets to shake hands with Tom Hanks. So I'll say one thing. Between his book, doing a commentary, all the interviews I've seen, being in this movie, Jim Lovell is not afraid of press.
He has the claim to fame, and he is claiming that fame to the nth degree, for sure. But on the other hand, how cool is it that he was still alive to make that cameo and to tell the story? And it probably would have been lost to time otherwise.
Very true. I think that this movie came at the right time because, again, after Apollo 13, and Lovell goes into this in his book more in ways that I hadn't considered, but spaceflight was considered pretty routine until the Challenger incident in the mid-'80s, and then it was seen as dangerous but necessary because the reason we had space shuttles was to get satellites up there for the new satellite technology, and you can't shut that down, so it kept happening. But I never thought about why do you call it a space shuttle, but it's just shuttling satellite dishes to orbit and then coming back down again.
A reusable spacecraft, because usually they're one and done. Like a shuttle to the airport, it comes back and forth.
And by the time we reached the mid-'90s, there wasn't a whole lot of talk about space, except in sci-fi and things. And we were seeing some new wonders. Hubble, after all the jokes about its bad mirror, started to send home some messages, and Voyager 2 started to get to some new planets. But this movie hit at just the right time for this Tom Hanks monologue at the end that is voiced over the guys getting welcomed back home. And we'll talk about what happened to the guys that the voiceover talks about. out, but it does ask, when will we go back to the moon? When will space be a priority again? And we're 30 years away from this movie, and nope.
They keep talking about it. They keep talking about going deep space. I think, was it Neptune or Saturn? They're going to investigate a moon that might have water on it. Neil deGrasse Tyson was talking about it on something I was listening to. But yes, the space exploration, the budget cuts have been severe. And I know Kennedy Space Center in Florida, it's a museum. And we toured it when I was like 9 or whatever. But I can't imagine bringing my kids there now and them finding it any sort of interesting. We were at the Science Museum here in Chicago, and they had an exhibit. And the kids picked up one of the telephones, looked like an old-fashioned telephone, but it was like mission control thing, and they held it upside down because they have no idea how to use a telephone, right? Because they were born in this century. And all of these machines, my wife and I were just fascinated by, like, you know, how big the computers were and the things and that. We're sitting in mission control centers, blah, blah, blah. They could care less about it. And as I mentioned before about this movie too, they could care less. And so you're right. I mean, the interest in space travel exploration is, until it's something sexy again, I don't think there's a need to go back to the moon unless there's a practical purpose to do so, and they haven't found that purpose yet.
But we do, as I say, find out that Hayes, the Bill Paxton character, never got to space again because of those budget cuts that senator was talking about at the start of the film. But Mattingly would. He'd get to go on Apollo 16 and on the space shuttle a few times and things. So he did get his chance to be weightless. And the sad one for me is Swigert, who died before this film came out, got elected to Congress, but had cancer and never even got to be seated into Congress. That one hit.
Yeah, it's too bad. Norm Macdonald had a joke years ago about 12 men have walked on the moon, but most of us can only name like 2 of them. And that's a good point, right? To really hit home that to these men, to this time in history, it was a big deal to fly into space, to do all that. Recently, as we're recording this, within recent memory, there were 2 astronauts who were trapped in space longer than they were supposed to, and they finally got home, and they had to call on different countries with their space programs to come help out to get these folks in, blah, blah, blah. And it was an interesting little news tidbit, but, you know, it wasn't more than a couple of news cycles, if you will, regarding these people getting home. When they finally did get home, I think I read about it on a headline on CNN.com or something crazy, like somewhere buried in what we would qualify as a newspaper nowadays. It's still perilous. It's still hard to go up there. But again, you know, you see the astronauts on the Oscars every once in a while where they come up there and they broadcast from space. Where it's just, okay. And it's very true. It's so lackadaisical. So until something interesting happens of us going back into space, for a lot of people, it's going to be not that interesting. To me, it's fascinating to hear all about this stuff, but I much prefer this kind of movie and Gravity and The Martian, with the exception of Star Wars, about space movies. You know, I think the real life space travel is an amazing thing to dramatize. So, Justin, Arnie, do you recommend Apollo 13? Justin.
I was glad that we put this on the schedule and had a chance to revisit this movie, because as I said up front, it's been since 96 or so since I've seen this, and at that point in my life, I wasn't super interested in the space program, especially the history of it, and the older I get, the more I can appreciate all the effort and lives and just the cost of going through the space race, what it was, you know? I mean, we weren't born for the 60s when Kennedy put that on the map and said, let's do this, and the patriotism that came along with all of this, all of that had faded by the time that, you know, we came of age and could pay attention to this stuff. And we were brought up in the day and age of the space shuttle where, like we had talked about earlier, this all just kind of felt routine at this point. So as I get older, I'm enjoying going back and getting these glimpses of what history was to bring us to a point where we could sit in a theater and watch the imaginations that built off of this, right? We have Star Wars because George Lucas was inspired by the idea of space travel because of the space program. So a lot of my childhood was shaped by the people that were shaped by this stuff, and I can appreciate it on that level. As a movie, I think it stands up for being 30 years old. We were just talking about how they got the weightless shots, and that's impressive, and the practical effects for the launch sequence were great. At no point during this movie did I feel like I was watching a special effects reel. This all felt very much realistic, and it draws you in, and I think it holds up, you know, especially for a 30-year-old movie. There's there's movies that are 30 years old that you look at and say, whoa, we weren't quite there with special effects. This looks aged. So I'm glad that we had a chance to come back to this, talk about it, because much like with The Right Stuff, I feel like this is a much more exciting look at the space program. And what a happy coincidence that all of this stuff was true enough that they didn't need to inject drama and some of that BS that would make it feel hokey. So yeah, I think it's an important film. And as Brock spoke about, the younger generations are even less interested in this stuff, and who can blame them? I mean, we have billionaires going into space, into low Earth orbit just for a few seconds and coming back. Our space program has been decimated. We have privatized space travel, and I think it would be great if we could get back to a place where our exploration of space and beyond became more of a, if not nationalistic, maybe a global concern. That would be nice. That would bring humanity together if we start looking towards the stars together. And a movie like this now can kind of speak to that type of thing. So I think people that are younger than us should watch this movie to get some perspective on where we are. And it's not just all shooting Katy Perry up into space for Instagram posts. It's important to our history. So yeah, I would recommend watching this movie if you haven't, and allowing it to wash over you and take on the gravity of the men that got us to where we are now, that we could all be crass about it. So yeah, it's a recommend 30 years later.
Arnie.
You know, while the Apollo 13, the ship was faced with malfunction after malfunction, I don't think there's any doubt that Apollo 13, the movie, is firing on all cylinders. Horner's amazing score, the mostly practical special effects like you called out, Justin, the pacing, they're all on point. And like Brock talked about, I'm not quite as enthused with all the acting as you are, Brock, but I think the actors here are capable. I'm not completely engrossed by Hanks, who I think is just a little overly earnest in a lot of his roles, including this one, or the underdeveloped Paxton and Bacon, but Ed Harris really brings me into the ground-based drama. But I found myself a bit unmoved by many things in the film. The daughter's arc of going from uncaring to finally crying, the grandmother's confidence in her son, that if you could get a washing machine into space, my son could land it, the wife's worry. It's melodrama that's there to tell the audience how to feel and to drive home the danger, rather than what I prefer in movies is more character exploration. And as I mentioned, the knowledge I had going in that the crew survived also prevented the suspense from really working on me. And because I wasn't engrossed, I just see the filmmakers trying so hard. Horner's score screams, tension, 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 and the actors sweat and worry, but I'm a little unmoved. I'm interested by what's happening, but not feeling the emotion. And I wonder if some of the issue here is Ron Howard, as we've talked about. Competent director. I haven't seen every movie he's done. I think he's made one great film with Parenthood, but he's kind of generic. I don't think he has a style that I can go to, and his films are usually good and almost never great, and sometimes outright bad, talking about Far and Away. I think he got a couple of really good shots in here that we called out. I think he can bring together a really good cast and crew. His name brings A players to the table, but I don't think he elevates them so much as they elevate him. So this is where I land, no pun intended, with Apollo 13. It's a very good film that I've enjoyed watching. I've really enjoyed learning about the details of Apollo 13's disaster and triumph through the additional research, through Lovell's book, through the documentaries on the disc. But I feel the movie itself lacks the emotion to elevate this film from good to great. So it's a recommend for sure, but it's not going to become one of my favorite films. That said, I kind of think Apollo 13 is really the movie I needed this week. The story of human drive, ingenuity, perseverance against the insurmountable odds leading to survival against all those odds, hammered home by Horner's uplifting music. This is a really feel-good, celebrate life and celebrate man's accomplishments film. And with my friend Stuart facing his own seemingly insurmountable odds right now in the hospital, a story of human triumph gives me hope at a time when I desperately am in need of some hope. And I think that might be what a lot of people love in Apollo 13, the film, is it is a story of human triumph, of teamwork, of optimism, and of hope, and there's nothing wrong with that at all.
Apollo 13, the movie, since it's come out, has been on a lot of lists of, like, the great movies of all time. It's surprising that it is on so many different revered lists here and there, but 30 years later, does it still belong on those lists? Do people still return to this movie like they do to other bona fide classics? If the AFI 100 Years, 100 Movies was made today, would Apollo 13 make those 100 movies? I don't know. I do know that I like this movie a lot. I've seen this movie many times. I enjoy the journey of this movie. As I've mentioned 1,000 times already, I find the acting in this movie so strong, and it elevates the drama on the screen to a point that many movies envy. Even with all of its flaws, this movie works for me on so many different levels that I look forward already to watching it again. I don't put this in my top 10 of movies I've ever seen, but I really like this movie. And what it says about the human condition, the triumph of man, the ability to solve problems under pressure to save the lives of 3 individuals. It speaks to me on levels that I'm not even aware of, really. When you see a movie like Gravity, which is a special effects extravaganza, and it tells a similar story, I can't help but think of this movie when I'm watching something like that. This movie finds a way to, like maybe Real Genius does to you, Arnie. Like, it just finds its way back into my life often. Like, I think of something in my life triggers this movie in this way or that way. Like, it's one of those movies for me in my life. So obviously, as you have heard throughout this entire podcast, of course I'm recommending this movie. Watching it with a critical eye, having literally seen all of Ron Howard's movies since I first saw this one, and noticing his amazing abilities and his flaws as a director, this time out, I noticed stronger than ever before. The movie is 30 years old. I have seen many more Ron Howard movies. There are some hokey things in this movie. This movie could be extremely hokey with just one less strong performance. But he was able, as Arnie mentioned, to bring the right people together to make this movie work as well as it does. So credit to Ron Howard where credit is due, even with all the Ron Howardisms that are here throughout this movie. And as his career's gotten on since this movie, we have, come to expect from movies that he directs. I was a little hard on him here because we have to watch with a critical eye here at Now Playing. But if I had to pick a Ron Howard movie to watch again tomorrow, it would be this one. I really like this movie. I think it's important to have in the world for people to learn about the space program. If you don't know anything about the NASA programs of the 60s and 70s, this is the place where you can absolutely find out a lot of information to maybe spark some interest. I know it did for me. I've read books about the space program because of this movie alone. So I hope that folks learn about it. I hope one day that we do travel in space and explore space, although I think a better use of money and time might be deep sea exploration here on Earth versus going into space. However, we'll see if that ever happens as well. Meanwhile, I'll be watching Apollo 13 until I die, and maybe even read Jim Lovell's book, which I haven't gotten around to, and maybe one day watch it with my kids again when they're old enough to actually appreciate it and not find it to be Apollo boring. So big recommend from me. If you haven't seen this movie in a while, I suggest you guys pop it in and watch it because it's worth your time.
So what you're saying is if you were trapped in orbit around the moon and only had one movie on board, you would take Apollo 13?
No, I'd take Butch Cassidy or I took Star Wars. But again, it's one of those movies that I love watching and I come back to now and then. And I don't watch it every year, right? I watch Moneyball every year, but I don't watch this one every year. Like, there are movies I really like that I don't return to on a regular basis. But when I do watch them, I'm like, oh yeah, this movie's great. And Apollo 13 is that kind of movie.
Yeah, and what I'll say is I never got to Apollo 13, not because I thought I wouldn't like it, but because I just thought it would be fine. And when I did see it and then watching it again, it's better than fine, but it just falls a little short of great for me.
I hear you. And it didn't win Best Picture, right? It's notable that it got nominated for like 10 Academy Awards. James Horner got nominated. Ed Harris got nominated. It only won for like sound. It didn't win for anything special. And it was a huge movie that year. And it just didn't work.
It got 9 nominations, but Braveheart got 10. And Braveheart took home director and picture. And
Sure.
It was the year of Mel Gibson.
Yeah, Braveheart really struck a chord with people, and so did this movie, but apparently, you can't take away his freedom. Anyway.
Well, speaking of the year of Mel Gibson, we're going to be visiting with him here real soon, aren't we?
Yeah, as you've already said, for people who didn't see the schedule on our website, next week we are going to be reviewing the John Wick miniseries, The Continental. I said, and I mean, we are not going to do any shows Stuart was planned to join us for until he's better, but Stuart was never going to cover John Wick with us. We have joining us our executive producer, Jason. You may have heard him if you listened to our last 3 Halloween movie reviews. He joined us at the beginning of those to talk about his Halloween hype. Well, he, Justin, and I next week are going into the world of John Wick for The Continental as we lead up to The Ballerina. So that will be a new release we are still covering. And then the week after that, Brock, you'll be back with us. Again, Stuart wasn't going to ever be on the Final Destination retrospective series. So Brock, you, I, and Marjorie will be looking at Final Destination Bloodlines. And if it has the title Bloodlines, you know it's got to be good.
Yeah, I mean, one of those subtitles that keeps popping up forever. It's so many things with bloodlines. But yes, I'm looking forward to returning to that series. After our last one, I was like, yeah, they beat this horse to death, but it's been so long. So maybe a new Final Destination is just what the doctor ordered. We'll find out when we talk about that in a couple of weeks.
And we'll also be back with you for Karate Kid 6 Legends, which Jason is going to be joining us for. That wasn't going to be a Stuart show, so we will be discussing what happens when worlds collide, when Ralph Macchio meets Jackie Chan.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to revisiting the series, you guys. I mean, after Cobra Kai, why is there a need for another Karate Kid movie? Well, we'll find out when we talk about that when that show comes out.
And meanwhile, this Friday, if you are a platinum level donor, as we've mentioned, Stuart did record 3 Ghost in the Shell reviews before he went in the hospital. Hopefully you can join us this Friday to hear him. He was so passionate about the Ghost in the Shell series. And this Friday we discuss the sequel, Innocence. Last Friday we had the review of the original. This is going for platinum level donors on Podbean, on Patreon, or a direct donation to us that you can do at nowplayingpodcast.com/donate. And we have a list of Podbean and Patreon patrons we want to give a shout out to.
Thank you to Azana Reed, Neil Mulcahy, Daniel McNally, George P., Brandon Boldman, Garrett Collins, Tim Tracy, Mark W., A.T. White, Nath Williams, Lucas Dosher, Lee Addison.
We also want to thank Lee Drag, Jeff Gannon, Jeffrey Gaudreau, Martin D. Hibbets, Stephen Bell, G. La Torre Yates, A. Nick Hosack, Jeremy Mills, Sean O'Keefe, Eileen Rivero, Michael Windsor, and Joe Black.
And I want to shout out our supporters Lucy Rodriguez, Chris Harris, Gerard Lavelle, Timothy Graham, Simon Brennan, Alejandro Avila, Tom Ward, Sean Burgess, Julian Lewis, Waji Bader, Don Andrus, and Darker Hue Studios.
And we can't forget about Ken Lyons, Andrew Doran, Andy Crake, Trevor Harrison, Jeff Wade, Comic Fan 96, ZBGB, 1111, Bastion Roman Peter, Grand Canyon, Matty B., and Fisher Jaw 12.
And finally we have Scott, T. Ward 1971, Seamus Finlayson, Hey You, Kiefer 51, Cokes J, Rudax, Chris Cross, T. Casta 2176, J. Clark Fisher, S.G. Harsh, Dimitri from Belgium, and Now Playing Fan. Thank you to all of you.
And thank you to everyone who's listening to Now Playing. We appreciate you downloading our show and joining us as we go off into space. And also, just on a personal note, thank you to everyone who's keeping Stuart in your thoughts. He could really use that positive energy right now. We're all really, really worried about him right now. So thank you to everyone who shared your concern for him. And we're pulling for him. And hopefully we'll have some good news soon.
Hear, hear.
Indeed. Absolutely. So that wraps up our Apollo 13. Gentlemen, it's been a privilege podcasting with you.
So, this is the crew of the Apollo 13, wishing everyone back on Earth, a pleasant evening.
Thank you for listening to this Now Playing Podcast movie review.
Well, let's hope we don't have to do that again.
We hope you enjoyed the show.
I can't imagine ever topping that.
Help us spread the word about this show by leaving a 5-star review on Stitcher, Podbean, iTunes, or your podcast store of choice.
I heard it was going to be a hell of a show.
So who told you that?
Some guy I know.
Want more reviews like this one? In the archives section of NowPlayingPodcast.com, you'll find more than 1,000 in-depth movie reviews from our panel of hosts.
I gotta get over there. We're gonna have to get up to speed on this.
On our site, you can hear reviews for every installment in the world's biggest film franchises, including the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Star Wars, Spider-Man, Batman, X-Men, James Bond, Middle-earth, Jurassic Park, Fast and Furious, and Transformers.
Better than Neil Armstrong. Way better than Pete Conrad.
Plus, we have individual movie reviews, such as Titanic, E.T., Inception, Big Hero 6, Ready Player One, Pulp Fiction, Apocalypse Now, Dr. Strangelove, and hundreds more.
We're very proud and very happy when we're thrilled.
And come back to NowPlayingPodcast.com next Tuesday for another all-new movie review podcast.
We are not losing the crew. We are not losing those men.
Support from listeners like you keeps Now Playing Podcast on the air.
We're not going to have power much longer. The ship's bleeding to death.
You can donate directly by tapping the support button at NowPlayingPodcast.com.
Gene, the Odyssey is dying. From my chair here, this is the last option.
And you can join our crowdfunding campaign for early access to new episodes, exclusive reviews, and bonus reviews available for a one-time contribution.
This doesn't work. We're not going to have enough power left to get home.
Need more Now Playing? Subscribe to our In Focus weekly newsletter for exclusive digital download giveaways, celebrity interviews, behind-the-scenes insights, and more. Sign up through the subscribe page on our website and get it delivered to your inbox every Friday.
I don't care what anything was designed to do. I care about what it can do.
You can also compare notes with us on Letterboxd. Go to letterboxd.com/nowplaying.
Reading your telemetry? It's good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Houston.
And follow Now Playing on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and our YouTube channel.
Okay, Houston, that leaves us with just the computer, which I'm shutting down now.
Now Playing Podcast is produced and edited by Arnie Carvalho.
I'm in command of the best ship with the best crew that anybody could ask for.
Associate produced by Jason Latham.
Let's work the problem, people.
The opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual hosts and may not reflect the views of Venganza Media Incorporated.
This was my call.
Must have been a tough one.
Venganza Media Incorporated is not affiliated with, and this podcast has not been prepared, approved, or licensed by any entity that created the film analyzed herein.
Looks like we just had our glitch for this mission.
All movie clips and music included in this podcast are the intellectual property of their respective copyright holders. They are included here for the purpose of review, and no infringement is intended.
You really outfoxed him, brother.
Now Playing Podcast is an exclusive trademark of and may not be used without the express written permission of Venganza Media Incorporated.
We just lost the moon.
Now Playing is a Venganza Media production, copyright 2025, and no part of this show may be reproduced, repurposed, or redistributed without the written permission of Venganza Media Incorporated. All rights reserved.
Houston, we have shutdown.
Like him and Rob Reiner were a big deal in the 90s. Penny Marshall, too. The three of them were on TV in the 70s, and they became directors in the 90s, and it was a kind of a big deal.
I'll never forget an episode of The Critic where Jay Sherman was having to write something, and he was just stumped. And one of his go-to articles was Meathead, Ritchie, and Laverne, the great directors of the 90s.
And for those who are younger, look it up. It was funny. So... I have a quick question about The Continental. By chance, is Christopher Walken in that movie? Because that's the movie I would want to watch.
He is not, but that would be good, is to have him cameo in The Continental.
Right, as The Continental. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, YouTube it again. It's, oh my God, every time he hosts SNL, they just bring that back, and it's always funny. What a great character.
They couldn't do that today because of woke, but, you know.
I understand. But the brilliant thing about it was when he first hosted all those years ago and he did it, and then he kept on bringing it back. You're like, oh, yeah, and then it got to the point where you look forward to it. But yeah, it's a little bit, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was funny in the day, and I always think of Christopher Walken when I hear people say The Continental.